December 19, 1997. A Boeing 737-300 was pushed back from Jakarta International Airport, preparing for departure to Singapore's Changi Airport. The flight was SilkAir Flight 185. After completing routine ground preparations in Jakarta, the aircraft took off from runway 25 at 8:37 a.m., bound for Changi. On board were 97 passengers, 5 cabin crew members, and 2 pilots. The captain, aged 41, was an experienced pilot with more than 7,000 hours of flight time. The first officer, only 23 years old, had accumulated around 2,500 flight hours. After takeoff, the flight was cleared to proceed directly to the PARDI waypoint, located about 330 nautical miles northwest of Cikarang. At the same time, air traffic control authorized the aircraft to climb to a cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. After the crew reported reaching cruise altitude, controllers instructed them to continue northbound along the airway toward the Pardai waypoint and to report their position while passing Palembang. Soon after, radar showed the aircraft flying over the Palembang area. Air traffic control then instructed the crew to contact Singapore control. The crew acknowledged the transmission. That acknowledgement would become the final radio communication ever received from Flight 185. At that moment, the flight had been airborne for about 30 minutes. Only 8 minutes later, the aircraft suddenly entered a rapid and steep descent, broke apart in midair, and crashed into the Musi River Delta, around 50 kilometers northeast of Palembang. The investigation. In this investigation, we will revisit the evidence uncovered by accident investigators and explore the conclusions they ultimately reached. To fully understand what happened, we must step into the investigators' perspective to see how they examined, one by one, each possible factor that might have led to this catastrophe. Weather and initial observations. The weather conditions on the day of the crash were generally favorable. 2 minutes before the accident, another aircraft cruising at 31,000 feet along the same route requested a deviation to the PARDI waypoint due to weather, though it did not specify the reason. Another aircraft flying behind, at 41,000 feet, reported good weather along the airway, noting only 2 or 3 isolated thunderstorms about 10 nautical miles east of the route. It added that there was no significant turbulence. Further checks confirmed that all navigation aids and approach systems along the route and near the accident site were functioning normally. No malfunctions were found. The runway in use in Jakarta that day had also undergone a routine inspection. Reports showed it was in good condition with no foreign objects or debris. From this, investigators concluded that there were no external factors that could have caused the disaster. Radar data and the sudden descent. Based on radar data retrieved from Jakarta Control, at 9:12 UTC, the aircraft was still cruising steadily at 35,000 feet. But only 8 seconds later, on the next radar sweep, its altitude had plunged to 19,500 feet. That was the last position recorded by radar. The aircraft made no distress calls and sent no emergency signals. The rate of descent was extremely high. This confirmed that the airplane had indeed descended at an extraordinary speed in a very short time, but offered no clues as to why it happened. Crash site and wreckage findings. When rescue teams reached the crash site, they found the aircraft completely destroyed. The wreckage had been driven deep into the riverbed, evidence that the aircraft had struck the ground at high speed. out of control. Parts of the tail section, including the vertical stabilizer and rudder, were found on land about 4 kilometers from the main wreckage. From this distance, investigators concluded that the tail had separated in mid-air before the main body struck the ground. The crash occurred in a delta region about 8 meters deep with swift tidal currents. The force of the impact had shattered the airframe into fragments. Only about 73% of the aircraft's structure was recovered. Analysis of the wreckage revealed no signs of fire, either before or after impact, and no clear evidence of mechanical failure. The damage pattern was consistent with an in-flight breakup, followed by a high-speed impact with the delta surface. Roughly 85% of both engines were recovered. Examination showed no indications of fire or explosion, and no signs of malfunction. Both engines were found to be operating at high power at the moment of impact, a crucial detail showing that no one in the cockpit had attempted to reduce engine thrust before the crash. Further structural analysis. Investigators also conducted tests to determine whether aeroelastic flutter, a vibration caused by the interaction between the aircraft's wings or tail and the airflow, could have led to structural failure. This possibility was ruled out. Flutter, if uncontrolled, can cause fatigue damage to wings or control surfaces, and in severe cases, may result in catastrophic structural failure. The investigation continues. Investigators examined every single piece of wreckage with the precision of a magnifying glass. But even after exhaustive inspection, they found no clear signs of mechanical failure. Next, their attention turned to the recording devices, hoping to uncover clues that might reveal the truth behind the tragedy. In every aviation accident investigation, the two most critical devices are the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and the flight data recorder, FDR. The cockpit voice recorder captures the sound environment inside the cockpit, including audible warning tones, system noises, and conversations among the crew or with anyone entering the cockpit. It records all communications with air traffic control, operational discussions, and even casual conversations. The flight data recorder, commonly known as the black box, is part of a subsystem designed to record key flight parameters and performance data throughout the flight. The recorder's job is to gather and store information from numerous sensors across the aircraft. Its storage system is specially engineered to survive even catastrophic crashes. Fortunately, both of these crucial devices were recovered successfully from the crash site. However, what investigators found after analyzing them only deepened the mystery surrounding the accident. Timeline of the flight. SilkAir Flight 185 took off from Jakarta at 8:37 a.m., cleared to climb to 35,000 feet. At 8:47, the crew reported passing through 24,500 feet. By 8:53, they reported reaching cruise altitude, 35,000 feet, and were cleared to proceed to the party waypoint, with instructions to report their position when flying over Palembang. But at 9:05, the cockpit voice recorder stopped recording. At 9:10, as the aircraft passed over Palembang, air traffic control instructed the crew to maintain 35,000 feet and to contact Singapore control after reaching the party waypoint. The crew acknowledged this instruction, and that conversation was recorded by air traffic control, but it did not appear on the cockpit voice recorder. Moreover, the flight data recorder also stopped at 9:11. The two recorders had ceased operation almost simultaneously,
an event extremely rare in any aviation history, and one that defied both logic and safety protocols. What the last recording revealed. According to the final segment of the cockpit voice recorder, it appeared that at the time of stoppage, the captain was alone in the cockpit. The recording revealed that the captain had told the first officer to go out for a meal. Moments later, several metallic clicks were heard, believed to be the sound of switches being moved. Roughly 6 minutes later, just a few seconds before the recording stopped completely, another clicking sound occurred. The source of these sounds has never been explained. Even more puzzling, both devices had been functioning perfectly prior to that moment, with no indication of malfunction. Based on available data, investigators could not determine why the recorders stopped simultaneously, nor could they establish the exact time gap between the two stoppages. Focus shifts to the flight crew. Following this discovery, the investigation turned its focus to the professional and personal backgrounds of the two pilots. Interviews with colleagues indicated that the captain and first officer had no conflicts or disagreements prior to the accident. Voice recording analysis showed that their interactions during the flight were normal, with no sign of argument or abnormal behavior. The final report concluded that there were no issues in their working relationship. Medical and psychological review. Investigators then reviewed the medical records of both pilots. Results showed that neither had any serious health conditions. Both were physically fit. The voice recordings contained no evidence of illness, discomfort, or incapacitation. The report concluded that both pilots were free from medical, psychological, or physiological impairment throughout the flight. Professional backgrounds. The first officer's professional record was entirely normal. His financial status was stable, with no debts or economic stress. Family and colleagues confirmed that his mood and behavior had been normal in the days before the accident. As for the captain, records show that he was well regarded among colleagues and had successfully transitioned from military pilot to commercial aviation. Though he had experienced a few minor operational incidents in the past, such occurrences were not uncommon for a pilot with thousands of flight hours. However, investigators did uncover one particular flight in which the captain had violated company standard operating procedures. This incident later became a key point of interest in the investigation.
Standard operating procedures. Standard operating procedures, commonly known as SOPs, are the basic operational regulations set by airlines for their pilots. All pilots must strictly adhere to these procedures during flight and undergo regular evaluations to ensure they fully understand and comply with them. In this incident, the captain involved had, before a flight, manually pulled a circuit breaker without authorization. This act was considered by SilkAir to be a serious violation of company rules. During the internal investigation that followed this violation, the captain filed an appeal, but his appeal was rejected. Although there were signs that he felt dissatisfied with the outcome, its psychological impact on him could not be clearly determined. Financial situation. When investigators examined the captain's financial history, they discovered that between 1990 and 1997, his stock trading activities had resulted in overall losses. While he never faced bankruptcy, his account had been suspended twice due to outstanding trading debts. Investigators also found that he held several life insurance policies. One of them, the most recent, had been submitted on November 27, 1997, with its effective date set for December 19, 1997, the very day of the accident. The investigation was meticulous and exhaustive. Almost no potential clue was left unexplored.
Yet even with such depth, investigators still could not find a definite cause for the crash. The Indonesian investigation. The Indonesian National Transportation Safety Committee led the official investigation. It was a process that was long, detailed, and immensely complex. Due to incomplete wreckage recovery and interrupted flight recorder data, the available information was extremely limited. As for the captain's financial situation and his mental state, these were considered only indirect evidence. Based on all the evidence available, the final conclusion of the Indonesian authorities was, the investigation could not determine why the aircraft suddenly departed from cruise altitude, nor explain why both flight recorders stopped functioning at nearly the same time. The accident claimed the lives of 97 passengers and 7 crew members. For their families, the most painful truth was that the cause of the disaster would forever remain unknown. The NTSB's response. But the story did not end there. On December 11, 2000, the United States National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, issued an official response to Indonesia's investigation report. In its letter, the NTSB stated that based on all available evidence, the accident was not caused by any mechanical failure or system malfunction, nor did any mechanical issue contribute to the event. The NTSB concluded that the crash could be explained by deliberate pilot control inputs. Specifically, the flight path of the aircraft was consistent with sustained manual nose-down control. Evidence also suggested that the cockpit voice recorder was likely manually disconnected and that the nose-down inputs were most likely made by the captain, who had resumed control of the aircraft. Other possibilities. At that time, several other incidents involving Boeing 737 aircraft around the world had drawn attention to rudder system anomalies, suspected to be linked to a malfunction in the hydraulic power control unit. The Seattle Times published a 37-part investigative series examining Boeing 737 loss of control accidents and the rudder system problem, which also included the case of SilkAir Flight 185. Controversy surrounded the NTSB's role in investigating these rudder-related accidents. During the investigation of another 737 crash, the NTSB discovered that the rudder power control valve could jam due to thermal shock. When a cold valve unit was suddenly filled with hot hydraulic fluid, its internal components could briefly deform, causing the rudder to deflect in the opposite direction of the pilot's input. However, this possibility was eliminated in the case of Flight 185 because Boeing had already modified the design of the rudder control unit before this particular aircraft was built. Therefore, the NTSB's final conclusion was clear. The flight trajectory, recorded data, and cockpit voice evidence are most consistent with deliberate control inputs by the captain, leading directly to the crash. A strange coincidence. Investigators later uncovered a curious piece of information, one that could not be proven but remained unsettling. Years earlier, when the captain was serving as a pilot in the Indonesian Air Force, he had been assigned to a training mission that took place on the same calendar date, December 19th, though in a different year. During that mission, his aircraft suffered a mechanical malfunction, forcing him to abort the flight. The remaining 3 aircraft continued with the exercise. They encountered severe weather and crashed into mountainous terrain, killing all the pilots on board. The captain survived only because his aircraft had failed earlier that day. Even with this additional detail, the true reason behind the fall of SilkAir Flight 185 remains forever uncertain, a mystery that continues to echo through the history of modern aviation.